He's big, he's important, he kind of looks like me in the mornings. And he's the leader of the Returners. His name is Banon. You meet him fairly early on in the World of Balance in Final Fantasy VI, and it's your job to ultimately keep him alive during certain spots in the first half of the game. Honestly, I figure by now, a lot of people have made their way through the Final Fantasy VI Pixel Remaster, and I've been waiting a hot second to run this question by fans of the game. Without using any sort of search engine, was Banon ever mentioned in the World of Ruin? If he's so big or important or any sort of leader, shouldn't people, especially his followers, be worried about his whereabouts? Apparently not. So then what ended up happening to the guy? Before we go too wild with theories and all that, let's take a step back and look at a character only briefly mentioned in the first half of the game called Duncan. There's a few things we know about Duncan straight away. He trained Sabin, and his son Vargas in a cottage just north of South Figaro, near Mount Colts. We know he's an older, spry fellow who trains rigorously and that he has a wife in South Figaro, maybe hinting at the fact that he's originally from South Figaro. What we don't know is his character. We get some conflicting information here. Sabin seems to think he's a very stern but fair leader. Vargas, on the other hand, despite his tall and strong stature, seems to think his dad overlooked him and wanted Sabin to be his successor like a bratty younger sibling. That's kind of all we know in the beginning. I mean, I guess his wife seems kind of chilled despite not knowing where her husband is or even if he's alive. Now let's take a look at Banon. Well, firstly, the sprites are literally just a palette swap of the same person, so there's that. But on top of that, he's an older, spry fellow who learns vigorously and that he has a hideout fairly close to South Figaro. Tell me that doesn't sound just a little too similar in the description I gave Duncan earlier. Could Banon really be Duncan and he's just leading a double life? Well, Lenard, that's all well and fine, but where's your proof? I'm glad you asked. If you really pay attention to when you first encounter Sabin in Mount Colts, he thinks that Duncan is dead. Plain and simple. Fast forward a little bit to the point where you're beating Ultros on the Leet River. Sabin tries to hit Ultros with a blitz, but ends up falling into the river and everybody freaks out about it, except one person. Banon is literally like, don't worry about Sabin, because he's Duncan. He knows Sabin very well because he trained him and Vargas to be super strong dudes. Well, Sabin mainly. Vargas not so much. Duncan has apparently been missing for a while now, and everybody believes that he's dead. But in all actuality, he's Banon, living a second life. Case closed. Need some more proof? I got you. I mean, we all know that Banon is super weak when we have him in our party, but have you seen the character art that Yoshitaka Amano drew of this guy? He's freaking swole! Oh, and it turns out Banon is from South Figaro, according to the Final Fantasy Ultimania book. I mean, there's nothing in-game that comes out and says Banon is from South Figaro, but he does have the Returner's hideout not too terribly far from South Figaro. So maybe that's something to think about. In the second half of the game, Banon isn't even mentioned anymore. But if you visit Duncan's wife at this point, of course, now she knows where he is and has seen him around. I mentioned earlier that both characters are literally palette swaps of each other, but also take a real close look. Their tents are identical also. But Lenard, a palette swap doesn't mean anything. Oh, really? I'm 100% sure that a palette swap was used to be a plot point later on in the game. Do you remember? In the second half of the game, when you try to find the King of Figaro, Edgar, Sabin's brother, he claims his name is something totally different, but ends up actually being Edgar with a, say it with me kids, palette swap. This is a main story point. It's canon, and I'm gonna sip my coffee now. But really, if none of this stuff means anything to you, and Duncan is Duncan and Banon is Banon, then we'll have to look at personality similarities and some in-game locational differences between the World of Balance and World of Ruin. Let's look at the similarities and personalities first in the two. This will just take a second. In the first half of the game, Banon really makes it known all throughout your time with him that Terra is the key to survival against the Empire, or Kefka. Then the world ends, completely obliterated. Our heroes have failed. So after all that, when Sabin finds him, now Sabin is the key to survival against Kefka. Here's some sweet moves, including a rush of bums. Only the people who played the Super Nintendo version will get that reference. Wait, what is it called in newer versions? Phantom Rush? Just not quite the same. A bum rush it will always be, forever. For the locational differences, it's just a more in-depth, and you kind of have to stretch a bit with your imagination to really find what you're looking for, if I'm being truthful. But if looking at the World of Balance map, Mount Colts is northeast of South Figaro, with the Returner's hideout just past it to the north. But in the World of Ruin, everything has been split up and thrown around. Mount Colts doesn't really exist in any capacity now, unless we consider this mountain range next to the dinosaur forest to be it. But if so, then where does that leave the Returner's hideout? But what if, just maybe, this small mountain range is all that's left of the Returner's hideout, and Duncan's cottage just happens to sit right outside of it? With the destroyed Mount Colts to the south, being positioned northeast of South Figaro. The game doesn't offer up an explanation, but I think either one of these configurations could be correct. And honestly, with Duncan's cottage and the returner's hideout being so close, even in the world of balance, it's kind of a crapshoot, really. Does any of this matter? No. Is it something fun to think about? Yes. Did I make this entire video because someone pointed out that there isn't any concrete evidence that Banon is Duncan and they're the same person except for a palette swap? Kinda. But that's besides the point. In the end, I just wanted to present something that makes people think about the video game worlds that we all love so much. There's a comic book series set in the world of Final Fantasy IV that Disney, of all people, wanted Square to put out. We never got it, but I've got some photos of it. You have to see that video over there.